thank everybody for coming today. I am so excited to introduce to you the historic images, local photographs that were taken by Frances Benjamin Johnston, who was one of my very favorite historic personalities. So I can't be objective about her because I'm an enormous fan. She was an independent woman who believed that she could succeed at whatever she chose to do. Fortunately for us, she chose to document the people and the places around her, and those images were donated to the Library of Congress, and they are available in the public domain for all of us to see and use without attribution, but I attribute them anyway because I want to send people over to the Library of Congress to see more. Okay, this tells you a lot about who she felt she was. So if you Google Frances Benjamin Johnston, and you're going to find this image probably more than any other. It's a self-portrait took in her studio in 1896, and it says an awful lot about how she thought of herself. Here she is, posing as what she called the independent new woman. Petticoat showing, beer stein and cigarette in her hands, and the portraits on the mantle are 6 men that she admired, that she had photographed. They are a poet, 2 librarians, an architect, an inventor, and a playwright. Frances was born on January 15, 1864 in Grafton, West Virginia, the only one of her parents' 4 children to survive to age 2. And if you think about that, it will explain an awful lot about how she was able to do what she was able to do later in life. She was very much coddled and loved by her parents. An article that I read about her in the WETA PBS blog, I thought described her perfectly. Johnston was raised upon privilege. Her mother, Antoinette, was one of the first women political journalists for the Baltimore Sun, and her father, Anderson, was a senior bookkeeper for the Treasury Department. The Johnston family moved first to New York and then to Washington, D.C. when Frances was a girl, to a house at 1332 V Street Northwest. I love that they had the address. That they bought from naturalist John Burroughs, who designed the rear rose gardens. And that tickled my rose historian part of me. So here we have the rose garden in the back of their house, and the big skylight, that is the studio that Frances built when she remodeled the home. So the family enjoyed an active social life in D.C. They were all well connected, and Frances formed lasting relationships with Washington high society, politicians, artists, and intellectuals who would help her shape her career. Frances began her early education at home before studying in D.C. private schools and graduating from Notre Dame Academy, a religious school for women in Maryland. Johnston moved to Paris in 1883 to study for 2 years at the Académie Julienne. Her fine art training and later studying and teaching at the Student Arts League in Washington helped to refine her pictorial aesthetic. She began her professional art career shortly afterwards as an illustrator for Ladies' Home Journal and Demarest Family magazine. This is an illustration from the December 1889 issue of Demarest magazine. And I especially love it for those of you in the back who may not be able to see the very bottom of this slide. It says, "We do not give patterns for any of the designs on this supplement." So in other words, you can look, but we can't help you. In 1888, Frances expressed an interest in learning photography, and she was given her first camera by none other than George Eastman. I said, well connected. A close friend of the family, an inventor of the new lighter Kodak Eastman cameras. And she received training in photography and darkroom techniques from the director of photography at the Smithsonian. And here we have an advertisement for her photographic and illustrative services. Being based in D.C. gave her visibility and easy exposure to social and political connections. From the late 1880s through the 1910s, Frances had access to many of the prominent figures of the time, and she was the official White House photographer for 5 presidential administrations: Harrison, Cleveland, McKinley, Theodore Roosevelt, and Taft. The examples we see here are Booker T. Washington and Mark Twain. Here we have Susan B. Anthony on the left and Alice Roosevelt's wedding portrait on the right. These two portraits show Johnston's talent for using her images to convey the personalities of her subject. You can see that these are two very different individuals. One of my favorite quotes is from Alice's father, Theodore Roosevelt. He says, "I can do one or two things. I can be President of the United States, or I can control Alice. I cannot possibly do both." And here are two of many Johnston photographs of President William McKinley. The first one is in his office in 1898, and the one on the right, he is delivering his final address in Buffalo, New York. It was one of the last photos taken of him because he was assassinated shortly afterwards. Talk about being in the right place at the right time. In 1920, Johnston explored a new photographic niche, giving slide lectures to garden clubs and civic improvement organizations across the United States. These lectures usually led to private photography commissions from well-to-do garden club ladies. Called glass lantern slides, each slide was colored by hand. And there are hundreds of these slides in the collection of the Library of Congress. Now you have some background. Here she comes to Falmouth. Wrong one. Okay. So in the summer of 1927, Frances and her driver set off on a motor tour of the East Coast. While on this trip, she fulfilled a commission to photograph Chatham Manor for Daniel and Helen DeVore, who bought the estate in 1920 and had recently completed its restoration. There are 122 photos of Chatham's exterior, outbuildings, gardens, and interior in the Johnston archives. Now that we've finished getting to know Miss Johnston, let's start our tour. And I've arranged this as if we're on a walking tour, so we are mentally going to go through Falmouth. This photo shows the garden side approach to Chatham that we see today while we're walking toward the mansion from the parking area, familiar to anyone who has visited Chatham. And this is what the scene looked like in 1927, quite different than it does today. As we walk through that gate and turn around, this is what we see now. In 1927, this path was not the major entrance as we use it today. It appears to have been designed as a quiet destination to lead the eye through the gate, to highlight the statue surrounded by evergreens and perennials. Notice that the flagstone path ends right at the gate. This is an iconic view today, one that nearly everyone reaches for their camera to capture as they approach the path that leads through the garden to the mansion, with the statue and the gate in the foreground and the mansion in the background. I could not find a Johnston image that shows this view, and believe me, I looked. It appears that this mysterious omission is solved by looking again at the 1927 photo of the gate and the statue that we just saw. The spot where I stood to take my photo is probably somewhere in these bushes behind the statue. See the arrow? That's approximately the perspective. So people did not approach the mansion from today's parking lot back in the night, back when the DeVores were there. This is today's view of the stone path and the steps and the porch that lead to what we use as the main entrance to the mansion. 1927's image of the view is very similar, except that the ivy was established on the building. There are lush plantings in pots on the stairs, and two of the DeVore's dogs are sitting on the front porch. Here's another image of the same view, except now there's only one dog. Johnston looks to have taken the opportunity to compose a portrait image of the white dog sitting on one of the steps. And if you look carefully, you see a sliver of someone on the right trying to keep the dog's attention while it's being photographed. I did not notice that in the very beginning. I looked at it and went, someone's going, stay. Now both dogs are gone, and Johnston can concentrate on capturing an image of the architecture of the entrance of the mansion. Never mind, now she has a peacock in the frame. There is another image of two peacocks somewhere on the grounds, and from the background of the photos, I could not tell at all where those photos were taken. I would have loved to have recreated it, but I couldn't do it. That doesn't mean I'm not going to continue to try. As we stand on the front porch today with the mansion at our back, this is the view that we see as we look down the stone path toward the gate. And this is the same spot in 1927, looking down the front walk through the garden. Same tree, it's just considerably larger now. Out into the garden, the brick columns of the pergola are mostly empty. There are roses on some that are glorious when they're in bloom, and they're haystacks when they're not, but that's okay. I love roses, and rose haystacks are fine with me. In 1927, the pergola supported climbing roses and anchored a lush perennial border. I'm not going to talk much about the details of the garden in this program. To be honest, I could fill another hour just on that. I will say that the garden at Chatham was designed in 1921 by Ellen Biddle Shipman, who was very prominent in the garden architecture scene. She was known for creating labor-intensive planting designs, as you can see and you will continue to see. You have to have staff to have one of her gardens. So today the garden is maintained by volunteers who honor the original design and work with a simplified planting scheme. Here we have a classical garden feature surrounded by a circle of flagstones in the lawn in that garden. The feature and the flagstones are still there as they were in 1927, except you see that she has carefully arranged potted plants for interest, of course. This is the laundry building, which was built approximately 1768, according to the Park Service, and the summer house, it was built in 1940. This is the same view in 1927. The summer house in Johnston's photo is not the same one that we see today. It's similar with 4 columns, and it's in the same spot, but the structure that's there now is screened in, and it has a hipped roof, and it's covered with standing seam copper. This has a flat shed roof. It looks like it has a flat shed roof because there's no roof that shows above the eaves that I could find. Here's another view, modern, of the 1940 summer house. And here's Johnston's photo of the same view of the summer house that was there at her time. You can see that it's outlined with boxwood and it's festooned with climbing roses. This is the same image as the last one that's been hand-colored for use in her garden lectures. So on the opposite side of the front garden, this is the gate that leads to the service court and the employee parking area. In 1927, Johnston's photo of the same area shows turf paths and crisp planting beds full of trees and shrubs and perennials with the brick wall and the gate in the distance. Through the gate, we see a building with a dovecote and arches, one of which has a parked car in it. Same view in Johnston's photo. Same arches, same dovecote. This time the person is posing with a wheelbarrow full of hay. The brick of this building in this time appears to have been coated with lime wash, and we can see traces of the lime wash on the building today. Here's a modern, wider view of the arches and the dovecote, and you can see that the arch on the far right is bricked closed with an entrance door built into it. It's just same parked car. In 1927, all three of the arches were open, and there were roses trained up the wall and over the arches, and the wheelbarrow full of hay is artfully placed into the composition. This fascinated me because I'm wondering what they planted those roses in. Even though these old photographs are very dense, I could not find any trace of a decent amount of soil at the base of those arches, so it reminds me of probably like a sidewalk tree planted in a little box, and then it would have to find its moisture elsewhere. And here's a hand-colored lantern slide of the same image. Johnston often made color notations on the back of her black and white prints to aid in the accuracy of coloring the slides. Now we walk across the drive and we turn 90 degrees, and this is what we see if we were to go there today. And it hasn't changed much at all since 1927. I could find the only differences at all in that view are the plantings. And this is the side of the stable that faces away from the mansion. So if you go toward the main walk and you take a left-hand turn before you get to the statue, you're on the other side of the building from there. In 1927, Miss Johnston captured this image of farmhands with a wagon and horses loading hay into the loft above the hay door in the dormer. Notice the lime wash on the bricks of this building also. In this modern photo of the stable, we have, it's the employee parking area for Chatham. I would say that I discovered my very favorite image of this entire program from this location. Are you ready? Cows. They had cows. So we have grass and dairy cows where asphalt and parking spaces are today, and that's even the same tree as was in the modern image. And notice there's ivy even between the doors. There are two images of cows. One, the cows are looking at her. The other cows are paying no attention. So I'm thinking it was an outtake. Here's another view toward the back of the stable with the double gate and the corn crib on the right. In 1927, this area looked very much the same as it does today, except the cedar trees beside the corn crib are a lot bigger now. Let's run around the building and we'll take a look at the river side of the mansion. This is what it looks like today. We often see this photo, the Civil War era photo, with its double porch and its devastated yard. Johnston captured a look that's very similar to what we see today without the double portico, except it has ivy and large shrubs. Walking toward the river, we use these curved stairs to get to the river overlook. The obvious differences between 1927 and now is that the space that's occupied by lawn today was landscaped with shrubs and paths, and the handrail here has a bit more detail than the one we have today. Visitors today exit the Chatham property via this lane that leads down the hill toward River Road, passing through this gate. And you only see this view if you stop at the bottom of the hill and turn around. I figured out that in 1927, this gate had to have been the main entrance to the property because the entrance that we use now didn't exist. So people were going up the hill and down the hill, and they encountered this beautiful gate with the walking gate. I don't think we can do that now, it's too hazardous. Now that we've left Chatham, let's go upriver and we'll take a look at Belmont. The house that we know as Belmont was built in about 1800. Gary and Corinne Melchers bought the property in 1916. They renovated the house, modernized it, and built the gardens that we can visit today. The home and gardens are very well preserved, maintained as closely to the original as possible, guided by documentation and Corinne Melchers' garden notes. What I want you to notice for the Belmont photos is literally how few differences there are between the historic photos and the modern, and it's really all because of the attention to detail of the Garden Club of Virginia Ladies and University of Mary Washington, both staff and volunteers, adhering very closely to Corinne Melchers' notes, garden notes and building notes. Here we have it today. Well, that tree did not exist in the 1920s, but other than that, it's identical. As I was sifting through and organizing the images for this program, I realized that Miss Johnston worked in Falmouth more than once. So it was at least twice. I can't say any more than that, but there are 2 different time periods captured in her images. Most of them are summer, so they're taken when flowers are in bloom and trees are fully leafed out. But there were a few images that show leafless trees. So they had to have been taken either in winter or early spring. I tried to do the same when I was recreating her images. So here we clearly see Belmont's facade through the bare branches of the trees that are there now. The 1920s view of Belmont's front porch with his screened sleeping porch above. Today the porch is similar, but the screen is gone and the sleeping porch is open. Except for the front steps and the handrail, not much else has changed. This is the 1920s view of the spring house with its arched trellis with climbing roses and a stone path to the front door of the mansion. Almost exactly the same way we see it today. The path is slightly different, but it follows the exact same route from the front door, the spring house, and over toward the studio. This image could have been taken today, but it was taken in the late 1920s. Except for the ivy and the size of the plantings, it's exactly the same. Here we have the wooden Puto statue on its stone base that was brought to Belmont by the Melchers from their home in Holland. It lives in the sunroom now, having been brought indoors to protect it from the elements. The Puto that we see today is a bronze replica painted white to be a weather-resistant exact copy of the original. What I found fascinating is that Miss Johnston recreated the angle of her original Puto image during another visit after the statue was removed from the garden, leaving only the lowest section of the stone base. Undoubtedly documenting its removal. That's where it was. We follow the garden path around to the other side of the mansion, and we see the double curved stone stairs and the ornate cast iron railings. Today the stairs are exactly the same, and the original railing was recently removed and restored. the rows on the trellis between the windows on the left-hand, between the left-hand column of the portico is even the same variety that was there during the Melchers' time, because it was so carefully recorded in Miss Melcher's garden notes. As we continue down the path on this side of the house, we walk under large wooden arches that are covered with climbing roses. The arches today are exact replicas of the originals in the exact same locations. Now, past the arches, we can turn and go down the long stairs that lead from the house toward the hill, toward Falmouth. We've gone down the stairs, turned around, looked back up the hill. This is what you saw. And it's still what you see. The trees and shrubs beside the stairs themselves are not quite as thick or tall as they were in the 1920s, but the stairs themselves are the same. We've gone down the hill. As we reach the bottom of Belmont's Hill, and we walk into town to see the changes that we find. As we do this, it's really important for us to remember that the map of Falmouth has changed drastically since Miss Johnston took her photos. I knew it had, but I didn't realize just how drastically until I started to try to recreate some of the things that she did. Today's Washington Street is the equivalent of modern Route 17, and Cambridge Street continued toward the river to take travelers across the Old Falmouth Bridge in its various iterations toward Fredericksburg. What we know as the Falmouth intersection now didn't exist in the 1940s, when the construction of the elevated Falmouth Bridge realigned the roads and split the town in half. Literally erased good portions of it underneath that fill that they used to elevate that road. At the intersection of Washington Street and Ingleside Drive, we see the Barnes House. Miss Johnston's photo of it shows a yard that's overgrown and a dwelling that definitely looks like it could use some attention. The structure continued to decay for many decades after this, looking at times as if it would collapse onto the road. I found this Google image of the Barnes House probably at its worst, and you see its advanced state of decay, shored up by timbers to stabilize the structure so it doesn't collapse onto the road. It really looked, it was on the brink. And this is what the Barnes House looks like now, recently fully restored to honor its past and sensitively enlarged to meet the needs of its new family. It was on the Virginia Garden Week Fredericksburg tour this year, and it was the main reason why I absolutely had to go on this tour, because I needed to see what the Holloways did to the house, and it is spectacular. They literally have restored the original portion of the house. The addition is complementary but completely separate, and it's perfect for their size family. It's a feature in Falmouth now. Miss Johnston called this brick building Eagle Tavern in her notes. I have also seen it referenced as the Temperance Hotel. Building looks almost exactly the same today, except that it used to be fully lime washed, and Washington Street in front of it is paved now instead of a dirt road. And I will tell you, when I was on the Garden Week tour, I took this photo from the front porch of the Barnes House because it looked like a good angle. That's why it's slightly elevated. This is an oblique view of the left side of the building as seen from the street in the 1920s. And this is the same view today, except for the overbroad growth and the loss of the lime wash. Very, very, very similar. This house is listed as the DeShields house, but I've also seen it labeled as the Hill House. The stone-lined bank of Falls Run in the foreground of this image was a solid clue that Rick and Jerry Lynn McGregor helped me see to try to figure out its location. It appears that this is where the DeShields house used to be, adjacent to the banks of Falls Run, beside the bridge that's there now. That bridge was built in 1929, it says on the plaque on it. Many of the stones that we saw on the bank of the run in Johnston's image are still there. Actually, wrong one. Here, that's a wall of a cemetery that I did not know existed until I was wandering Falmouth, and it is full of Hill descendants. So that's also another clue that I think we got in the right spot. Miss Johnston labeled this as Frank Hill's store. I looked and looked, and I could find absolutely no reference to modern landmarks in this photo to help determine where it was. Another photo in the Falmouth collection is labeled as the ruins of Frank Hill's store. In this image, we can clearly see the gable end of the old cotton warehouse in the distance. If this is indeed the same spot as the last photo, finding its location should be fairly simple now. I think this is where it was. This is the lane that leads from Washington Street to the sewage pumping station. It looks like this is close to the spot as the previous photo was taken, which is a short distance behind where the DeShields house was on Falls Run. And that green arrow points to the west gable of the cotton warehouse, a sliver of which is visible through the trees. I could see it while I was standing there, and try as I may, I could not get it to show up adequately in a photograph. So that's why the arrow, and you're just gonna have to believe me. Miss Johnston called this the Old Stone Bakery in her notes. It's also known as the Stowe House. Talking to Rick and Jerry Lynn, this building is a mystery, and its exact build date and original purpose are not documented. I do know that it's one of my absolute favorite buildings because that stone is so carefully carved and laid. It's a feat, and it's beautiful. It still looks very much the same today as it did, except the 1929 bridge obscures a bit of the front yard. And Mrs. Chavez's garden gives her some privacy from Washington Street. I've seen this building labeled as the Apothecary, and I've also seen it labeled as the Forbes House. It's been various offices during my time in Stafford. I visited there relatively recently when friends and I treated ourselves to a paint night at Wine and Design. Very much the same today. The most notable difference today is that the window opening on the far right has two windows instead of the one window that it had before. The building to the right of the 1920s image is a parking lot now. I don't know what it was, but I'm going to keep hunting to see if I can find out. As we walk around the corner and go north on Cambridge Street, we see the little brick building that has been known at various times as the Magistrate's Office or the Customs House. This view of the building today is obscured by trees and shrubs that grow between it and the building next door. This is the view of the previous buildings from a vantage point that's a little farther up the hill. I love how I noticed that the sidewalk only leads to the door of the magistrate's office. It does not continue past there. Oh, the things you learn when you're studying historic images, none of which you went to look for them for. The beige building on the right is a home now, and it's been greatly expanded with additions since the 1920s photo. It was for sale within the last couple of years, and if you're curious like I am, the interior photos are still on the real estate sites if you want to go snooping. At the top of the hill, almost where the Falmouth light is now, we find Miss Geneva Brooks's house, also known as the Cotton Warehouse. I've only ever known it as the Cotton Warehouse in my 20-some years in Stafford and my 20-some years in Spotsylvania. It's the Cotton Warehouse. But look at it as a beautiful home. I remember when the building was renovated to its current appearance in the late 20th century, and it was most recently the home of a Berkshire Hathaway real estate office that has a big sign that says it's for sale or lease. So it could be yours. I'm going to confess that I copied this image from Google Maps. I discovered that the proper spot to recreate many of the Johnston photographs of structures that adjoin the Falmouth light is somewhere in the middle of the modern road. And there is no safe way for me to do that. So fortunately, the Google team did a fantastic job of capturing some of these images. And it took a little bit of fiddling to get them to the angle that I wanted them to be, but bless Google, it worked. This house was listed in Miss Johnston's notes as Cabin by Falls Run, also known as Jenny Bryan's house. The building in the background, we're familiar with its prominent chimneys, and that's where Amy's Cafe is now. At first, I thought that the house in the old photo was somewhere on the berm that elevates Route 1 across the street from Amy's, next door to Cox's Crab Shack, across from the magistrate's office. I shared this photo on Facebook when I promoted this program a couple of weeks ago, and Jimmy Klein sent me a message, and he said, you know, I don't think that's where this was. I think it's on the other side of Amy's. He said, because that's where the run is. And I went, of course. So here's as close as I could get to it. This view makes a whole lot more sense than the other one because it said Cabin on Falls Run, and Falls Run is near to this. I could not get to the exact same spot because it's private property, stockade fences, so this is right next to Amy's dumpsters. And I kind of held the camera out so that I'm close. So I'm fairly certain that it was one of the structures that was over on that side near the river. Here we have the Duff Green Warehouse, which became the Lightner store. This image is everywhere, and it's usually attributed to Fredericksburg. So, no, it's Falmouth. We're going to be a stickler about that. The building lost its porch years ago. It's been renovated and it's home to businesses now, and it's completely surrounded by parking lots, and it backs up to the elevated Falmouth Bridge. These buildings, a home and a store, were beside the warehouse. The sign in front of the store says, fish sale. Today, those buildings are gone, and the spot is used as auxiliary parking for Amy's Cafe. I hunted and hunted and hunted, and it seems it's a large omission on her part, but I'm certain that the photos have to exist, that she took 3 images of various angles of Lightner's store, and she photographed the buildings beyond Amy's Cafe. I can't find an image of Amy's Cafe that features Amy's. But I will say that the Library of Congress website, things are arranged the way they work for archivists, not necessarily for researchers. And if I was finding the images, like the 122 images of Chatham, they are all in one spot, but you, instead of having them in a folder where you can see them all, you have to go next, next, next through 120 images. I haven't found a spot like that yet for the rest of the photos of Falmouth, but those of you who know me personally, I'm going to keep looking. This is a photo of Gordon Green Terrace. I know it is Irma's house. It will always be Irma's house to me. It's on the east side of Route 1, and it clearly shows the terraced landscapes that contributed to its name. It's a grand house, perched high on a hill above what used to be the center of a bustling Falmouth. Routes 1 and 17 were realigned and elevated to service the new Falmouth Bridge in the 1940s, destroying the terraces and constructing a new road almost immediately beside the house. Route 1 was widened and realigned again recently, taking even more of the buffer between the house and the highway. This is the north side of the house as seen from Carter Street, with its fence and garden and ornamental trees. The brick wing of the house you see in the foreground is the original portion of the house, built in 1784. And this is what the house looks like today. Subsequent owners have continued to maintain a fence on this side of the garden, and the garden itself is still lovely. On the other side of Carter Street, we see this photo of a home and buildings known as Dunbar's Quarters. That's Carlton high on the hill in the background. This is another image that you will see an awful lot when people talk about the history of Stafford. In fact, this image is in the package of note cards that we have available when we set up our little store at events. This is as close as I could come to recreating the angle of the image that Miss Johnston captured, because today there are homes and trees in the way of where her camera was set up. If you look closely, we can almost catch a glimpse of Carlton on the hill below the green arrow. In fact, I had to ask permission from the people in the one house if I could use their front yard to take the photo, please. And they said, go ahead. Closer image of Dunbar's Quarters shows just how charming it was 97 years ago, with its gravel walk lined with flowering shrubs and swings and rocking chairs on the porch. Today is home to a RE/MAX Realty office, and the garden and the path are gone. Recently, the board of the Historical Society was invited to take a look before the RE/MAX office opened, and we didn't go down into the cellar, which is where we think the 18th century exists. There's not much 18th century from the ground level up. Here's one view of this little building, which started life in the late 18th century as the kitchen quarters for Robert Dunbar's house. Dunbar died in 1831, and the property passed to his widow, then to their daughters. The house itself was lost sometime after the 1878 death of Dunbar's youngest daughter. The remaining property is amazingly intact, considering how old it is, and that it's located in a part of Falmouth that's been subject to great upheaval during its history. If you've lived here long enough, you may remember that it was hidden from view from Route 1 for many years by a car dealership. Back to Google Images. There's the car dealership. And if you look, it tucks right up against the west side of that building as closely as it possibly could. In fact, I believe that the retaining wall that they had to build to retain the hill, to build that building, is still there, though the dealership itself is completely been erased. We go up the hill and we find Union Church, which has a long history in Falmouth. It's It's perched on its hill at the curve of Carter Street. Actually, you can't help but notice it because you have to slow down a lot to make that curve. It was active with congregations from about 1824 to 1935, and it was shared by a number of Christian denominations for their services. Today, Union Church is literally a slice of the building that it once was. A hurricane in 1950 destroyed its roof, and the community came together to preserve the front of the building. This is the barn at Jet's Farm, which is approximately on the west side of Butler Road, and where Butler Road and Colonial Avenue intersects. So here's your another fun fact for the day. The logs of the building that's known as Hobby School were stored in this barn before it was reassembled across the street. This is what the site of Jet's Farm looks like today. Now we're going to turn left and we're going down Butler Road, and we see the Manor, which is also known as Gordon Gray's law office. This is what it looked like today. The Manor has lost the tops of its chimneys and all of its landscaping. Its most recent use was as the headquarters for Arenal Homes. I don't know if the sign was destroyed or if they're not there anymore, but there had been a sign in front. It's not there anymore. Miss Johnston labeled this as the Eddie Brooks house. There's also another photo that has a lovely detail of the front steps and the front walk. During the conversation with Rick and Geraldine, you told me that this is where Eddie Brooks' house used to be.
That's what
Yeah.
I was told.
Approximately. What do you think?
The old Falmouth post office.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Today is home to the Iglesia Pentecostal Cristo La Roca Church, and the building used to be the Falmouth post office. There's no trace whatsoever of anything that used to be on that lot. Now, the photos of Chatham were a private commission, and that was paid for by the divorce. The photos of the rest of Falmouth was part of it was a Carnegie grant. It was the Carnegie Study of the American South. And while she was working under those grants, she paid particular attention to capturing images of buildings that were deteriorated and were on the verge of collapse. One of these was Basil Kiger's house, which was a short distance north of the Falmouth Light on the west side of Route 1. And she labeled this Ruins of Basil Kiger's house. Today, an impossible to ignore electronic billboard sits approximately where the Kiger house used to. This is another Google image. I was not getting out of the car at this intersection. This is another image that we often see on historic Facebook groups. I think I recently saw it on the Spotsylvania group, and it's everywhere. This is Fannie Ellis's store. Mrs. Ellis's store used to be on land which is now at the intersection of Route 17 and 1. I love the fact that there's the little kids and the sign. Even though Miss Johnston said she got out of the portrait business, so many of the photos that we've seen have people in them. They're in there, they're doing something, and they give some relevance to the locations. The old store building was demolished when Route 17 was realigned to bypass the center of Falmouth and come straight down the hill to what is now the Falmouth Light. Mrs. Ellis moved her store to a new building, which was built nearby, which many of us knew later as the old location of Glover Enterprises. Glover's now in Chatham Heights. And the former building itself was demolished during subsequent construction to enlarge the Falmouth intersection. We've come full circle. And we've done a lot of walking, even though we haven't really gone anywhere. This last slide shows 4 of Miss Johnston's photos of homes that I haven't located yet. The labels that I have on each of the photos are the way that she labeled them. And they're also the labels on the Falmouth page of the Discover Stafford's website. Falls Cottage, Austin Butchert House, Payne House, and Eddie Young House. I will certainly keep looking for them, but I haven't.
I know where the 2 toppings are. Yeah.
Cool. Cool. And my next thing was, that's all I have.